And joining us now in the studio is the national economics correspondent for the Washington Post, Mike Fletcher. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure to be here.
Now, during the election campaign back in 2008, Barack Obama made a lot of noise about turning around George Bush's economy.
Right.
Do you imagine that the president is likely to be punished for what the electorate might see as a failure in that regard?
Well, two things. I think the public, even as I travel the country, I think many people say that Barack Obama inherited a big problem. You know, jobs were declining by hundreds of thousands per month, and, you know, economic growth had stagnated. So I think people cut him a little bit of slack on that, but, you know, in terms of the comparison to 2008. But I think the worry now is that things have just petered out. And what he talked about a lot was the George Bush economy, even before the crisis, didn't really benefit the vast majority of Americans. You know, median income in the United States is down over the decade, which is basically unheard of. And there's this kind of growing inequality that Barack Obama said he was going to attack. I mean, that's something he talked about building a foundation for an economy that will last. And I think when Americans look around, they don't see that. I was just in Nevada doing a story in one of these handful of swing states that will determine the election, and it's brutal out there. The Nevada housing market is down. The values of homes are down 2/3 since 2006. Imagine that. You know, 2/3 of your wealth, and that's for most Americans. That's all of their wealth out of the window. And Barack Obama has tried out program after program to help the housing market, but in reality, the housing market has fallen too much really for government to help. So I think that's the problem he has. I mean, he's promised. I think people understand that he had a big problem that he took on, but I think people are wondering whether he's up to the challenge of repairing things.
And of course, Mitt Romney, his contender, is a successful businessman, an extremely successful businessman
Perhaps
in the area
successful.
of management consultancy, private equity, and so on.
Yeah.
Now, is that inspiring a certain level of confidence in the electorate, the idea that perhaps here is someone who clearly can manage money?
Oh, there's some of that. I mean, in some ways, you know, Mitt Romney has paid a price. You know, the Democrats have attacked him. Obama has attacked private equity, in which even some Democrats said, hold on, don't go too far. This is a standard part of American capitalism, so let's not go too far here. And Mitt Romney, you know, there've been endless jokes about the amount of money he's made, you know, the elevator in the car elevator in his house in California and that sort of thing. But beyond that, I think there is this sense that this is a guy who understands the business world. I mean, as Stu Rothenberg says, he looks like a businessman. He kind of looks like a president, whatever that may mean. So, and the point, I think, for him, though, is he's an alternative to Barack Obama. Barack Obama had a totally different path into politics. You know, community organizer, state senator, rapid rise to the U.S. Senate, then the presidency, kind of this inspiring figure. And, you know, and Mitt Romney is more of an establishment figure. And sometimes in times of fear and times of peril, people want to cling to that type of figure.
And perhaps a little devastating to Barack Obama, Bill Clinton came out and described Mitt Romney's business as sterling. He had a sterling achievement in business.
Bill Clinton has a habit of every so often throwing a little jab at Barack Obama, even while overall he helps him a lot with voters. And it wasn't
supposed
just
to be on the same side.
Yeah, I know, but it was not just him. The very popular mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Cory Booker, African-American mayor, who's a strong supporter of Barack Obama, sort of made the same point. You know, he didn't use the word sterling, but he said, whoa, you know, private equity is not so bad. So let's slow down on these attacks and let's really focus on the real issue, which is creating jobs and middle-class jobs for Americans. And that's the real problem. No one's kind of found the elixir there. No one's found, you know, Barack Obama certainly has sort of the thing that's going to help, you know, American companies create jobs and good jobs. And he's battling a lot of things. It's not just the financial crisis. It's kind of the reality of globalization. The way rewards are kind of divvied up now in a global economy. There has to be some way to sort of change that formula. And Barack Obama certainly hasn't been able to at least enact his whole program. And if he did, it's unclear that would make the difference.
Part of the biggest problem with jobs creation is manufacturing, the same issue we have here in Australia, that the effects of globalisation mean that when you spread the wealth effect around the world, manufacturing jobs don't necessarily come to countries like ours.
Yeah, and actually, you know, interestingly enough, in the United States, one of the few bright spots in the economy has been kind of a return of some manufacturing jobs. Factories their output is up, they're hiring a little bit more, but this comes after a decade of devastation where the manufacturing core was hollowed out. And the factories that are hiring now are hiring many fewer people to produce many more goods. You know, there's some consultant reports out there saying that the United States is going to become a more attractive place to do manufacturing, but that doesn't bode well necessarily for workers because there aren't that many jobs created. But with shale gas and oil and things like that, energy prices are expected to be down in the United States. And with this productivity going through the roof, you know, a handful of workers can create a lot of products. So, and manufacturing, the other thing is manufacturing used to be good paying work for blue collar people, and the pay is going down as well in the United States for factory work.
Now, when you look at the US economy, the numbers, particularly from where we sit, are nothing short of a little scary. I mean, we have public debt in Australia of around $100 billion or so. In America, it's topped $10 trillion. Oh, yeah. Now, if that debt keeps growing, the government will have to raise taxes just to pay off the interest rate. Oh. Now, that is a grim prospect for whoever takes government, and there doesn't seem to be any votes in any strategy that might address that.
Exactly right. And no political leader on either side of the aisle. And of course, Republicans aren't going to raise taxes. And the Democrats try to politicize it. They talk about raising taxes on the wealthy, which they define as people making more than $1 million a year, which is a small handful of people, relatively speaking. And and there have been calculations done, even if you could raise taxes on that group of people, if that were politically feasible, it wouldn't begin to attack the debt problem. The problem in the United States is that the politics have become where you cannot talk about tax increases for the middle class. And no one wants to give up their benefits. So you kind of have this, you know, you're at loggerheads in a sense, and the debt keeps growing. Because what has to happen is, I think there would have to be tax increases that touched, you know, even the middle class. And in his last campaign, Barack Obama defined the middle class as families making $250,000 a year and less. You know, median household income in the United States is around $50,000. So it was a really interesting kind of definition of the middle class, but I think it speaks to the politics of tax increases. They're toxic for politicians.
And so the United States hasn't gone the austerity route, where intuition might say they should, to at least some extent, if they're going to tackle the debt.
Yeah, and there's so many things, they can do that actually aren't that painful. And austerity is a word that I think people think of the European model, they think of Greece austerity and think of painful cuts. But there are things we can do with our old age program, Social Security, moderate cuts, things like slowing down the rate of cost of living increases every year. That would make a huge difference over time. There are a lot of things that could be done to cut Medicare, perhaps having some of the better off people who are the shrinking pool of Americans who are getting pensions from private companies and have a lot of retirement savings, maybe having them pay more of a copay on their health care or a bigger deductible, that sort of thing. And no politicians talking about that because I think they think it would be a perilous conversation.
Is Mitt Romney a strong contender in your view for the presidency?
Yeah. Oh, I think absolutely. And particularly now with this economic slowdown. Back in the winter, it looked like in the first part of the year, it seemed like Barack Obama was once again, you know, drawing aces from the deck. Job growth was unusually strong through the winter. And it felt like, you know, we're creating about 250,000 jobs a month for a few months there. And it felt like, you know, we were kind of emerging out of the woods. Even though all along, people, the central bankers and other people who would testify in Congress would say, this job growth is not really justified by the underlying economic growth. People were a little bit baffled by it. But it seemed like then, you know, Barack Obama would eclipse Mitt Romney, who I think his one calling card is kind of this profile as a businessman. But now that things have slowed down, I think it puts Mitt Romney squarely in play. And again, as your report said, it's just a handful of states in the United States that will determine this election, 5, 6, 7 states that we call swing states. And that's where the campaign will be focused, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
What's your best estimate of where the economy will be in 6 months' time?
It's so hard to know. I remember writing a story, you know, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, when the Dow Jones Industrial Index broke the 13,000 point barrier, and it felt like that was part of this feeling of things are coming back, and you know the market is returning and confidence is back. Now the gains of this year have been wiped away, so it's really hard to predict. I do know this: over the last couple of years, we did have false starts in the economy where things looked like they were picking up, and then you had this kind of summer stall that persisted through the year. So who knows whether that'll be the case this year.
And the elephant in the room, as it is here, is Europe.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for coming in. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you.
It's my pleasure.